Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about getting MVPs right. As most of you probably know, MVP stands for Minimum Viable Product. It's a really fundamental part of startups nowadays. You can't really be a startup without having heard of this term, I would imagine. But there's a lot of things people get wrong about minimum viable products. And if you get them wrong, that can damage your business, where if you get them right, they can really help you. So that's what I'm going to tell you about today. My name's Hywel. Hywel is a Welsh name, which means it's almost impossible to predict the pronunciation when you see it written down. But it probably helps if you see a picture of some wolves, because Hywel is pronounced like the sound a wolf makes. So I work for London Startup Tech, which means I'm a kind of consultant CTO for hire. I'm like everything a CTO would be for your business, but I take cash rather than equity, so you get to hold on to 100% of it. I also match up CTOs with startups that need them, so if you're looking for either a position in a startup or a CTO, talk to me and I'll add you into my list and hopefully be able to fix you up with someone. I've been in a couple of startups myself, and nowadays I spend all of my time doing this kind of CTO role, so I see an awful lot of MVPs and I build a lot of them myself as well. Now, the reason we do the MVP process is because something like 20% of startups fail in the first year, and that's only the ones that bother to incorporate into companies. I mean, the failure rate is absolutely huge. And the number one reason for that is people not understanding the customer. When you interview failed startups about what went wrong, it's that they didn't really know who their customer was. They didn't listen. They just had a great idea. They got some feedback and were like, yeah, this is awesome. So they build, try and sell it, and they fail because no one gives them any money, right? It's a crucial thing as part of a startup. I hope we can all agree that if you haven't got any money coming in, eventually you will fail. So the idea behind MVPs is you fail sooner than you would have done. Right? Rather than being one of these startups that last 3 years, keeping trying and trying and trying, and then eventually failing, much better to try and fail in the first month or first 6 months or first year than after 3 years, because at that point, you can go and pursue a different idea. Right? When your ideas fail, that doesn't mean you failed. It means that you have achieved failure with that idea, and then you move on to something new and start going in a more productive direction. So, MVPs first introduced in this book, The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. It's the whole point of the book is about avoiding a drawn-out death for your startup. Probably some of you have read it, and you'll know that it doesn't really match what you hear about it. Quite often you hear stuff said about the book that doesn't really match what you get from it when you read it, particularly with respect to MVPs. You see, a lot of people talk about MVPs as if it's the same thing as a prototype. It's some kind of crappy, pared-down version of the eventual product that you're going to make. But that's not it at all. An MVP is much, much more useful than that. So an MVP is about doing the simplest thing you can to validate your assumptions about your business. Okay? The simplest thing to validate your assumptions. Now, there's nothing in that about doing a prototype. There's nothing in that about a rubbishy version of the real product. There's nothing in that about it even being a physical product. It's really about doing something. It's also not about being cheap. There's nothing there about spending less money. It's about speed, right? This is a way of minimizing the risk for your startup. You want to fail fast or not at all, right? So the whole point of an MVP is to test your ideas early and find their flaws as soon as you can. And that's great news if you're bootstrapping or if you've taken investment, because no one, however they're funding their startup, wants to spend 2 years on an idea that's eventually going to fail. So I thought it'd be fun to come up with an idea. This isn't a business that I'm actually doing. I just thought it would be a sample one that we could talk about with respect to MVPs. So I was in a cafe when I was writing this, so our startup idea we're going to consider is going to be called No Queue Coffee. It's a service we're going to sell to cafes. The customers can come in, order their coffee using an app instead of having to queue up, which is kind of annoying. The cafe gains some kind of reporting features from it. They get stock, inventory management, all that kind of stuff. And this is the business I want to consider when we talk about MVPs. By the way, this kind of thing already exists for restaurants. I know there's a London startup doing it for restaurants, and there's a restaurant on Wardour Street that already has a system like this. So do feel free to steal this idea and bring it to cafes. Cool. So the question I want you to consider is, what would our MVP be if we were working on this company together? Okay? It's day one. I'm just going to give you 5 seconds to just think about it really, really quickly. And I want you to work out what you would do for the MVP if we had this startup. Just 5 seconds. Go for it. Cool. So hopefully you all think about it. Someone's definitely thinking about it over there, seeing how many walk away. We'll come on to that in a second. So I hope you all get that the vision for this is like this eventual thing where it's a brandable thing we can take into cafes. There's like apps for all the different platforms. There's a web app showing all the orders coming in. There's all these reporting features. And probably you all thought, well, we can kind of strip away some of that for the MVP, do something even more basic. Maybe we can just settle for the Android and iPhone apps. We can put in some kind of like basic reporting because they need to know how much money they've made, and like some kind of live feed of orders for the baristas. Maybe that's the kind of simpler thing we can do to test out these ideas. And so this is what we would eventually build. There's the very basic Android app, very basic iPhone app, and very basic web app showing the orders. Now, I'm not saying this isn't something you should build. All I'm saying is I think this is at least the second thing you should do. Because right now, we don't actually know whether anyone wants to buy this. If we made it, it might be that people walk away, right? But it could be that we could find that out without even going to the trouble of building it. See, those mock-ups took me about 3 hours to make, but actually building the apps would be much, much longer. So the whole point is we shouldn't build something without knowing why, right? MVPs are all about learning. They're all about learning something about your customers, about the product they need, about what it's going to do for them, about how much it's worth to them. All of those are questions you have when you're just starting out, and MVPs allow you to answer them. In fact, there's a joke coming. Maybe it should have been called the Learn Startup. Pause for laughter. So at this point, you've got to learn who exactly the customer is, what do they need, what should it look like, and is it worth your time, right? How much are they going to pay you? If they all want it and it's going to fill this massive need in their lives, but they're not prepared to pay anything for it, then there's no point in you making it. Now remember, I said it's not necessarily a product. It's not necessarily a physical thing. What I'm going to suggest for the MVP, for this idea of no queue coffee, is going to be something that lets us learn the most important question, which is, the cafe owners and customers want it. So if we had built it, would they walk away? But maybe we can learn that without building it. My suggestion to do that is to use the mock-ups rather than the real apps. Right? Those mock-ups that I said took me 3 hours, I could have even drawn those on paper, but it's enough that I can take it to a cafe owner and say, look at what I'm building, this will be ready in 2 weeks, and get some kind of commitment to see if that person wants to use it for a trial. Immediately, I've learned something about my business, and all I've had to do is do some sketches and go and talk to some potential customers. And that to me counts as an MVP, because I've learned something about my business. Rather than sitting here thinking, oh, what a great idea, I'll build it and see who wants to use it. I've gone out and found out something about the need it's fulfilling for a potential customer. Now, I said about getting commitment. I didn't say getting positive feedback, and there's a very strong reason for that. Love is not enough. If you take your startup idea to some people and ask them what they think about it, about 95% of them, on the whole, will tell you that they love it. And that's not because people are lying, and that's not, it's no one's fault, right? It's because people have a lot of empathy. You explain your idea to me, you sound passionate, it sounds like a great idea, and I don't want to be the person to tell you I don't think it's that good. So what I would do is instead I'll be thinking of someone else. I'll be thinking of my friend and saying, oh, well, that's an amazing idea. You should definitely do it. It's not really for me, but I think you should totally do it. You should launch soon, add these features, and I know someone who will use it. That's not enough. What you need is for someone to want it with their wallet, right? This is crucial. If people aren't willing to pay for it, then you haven't found the right person. Everyone you're talking to is just answering on behalf of someone else. You want to find the people who actually are your customer, rather than the people who are imagining what your customer looks like. It's not your fault, it's not their fault, it's just a massive trap. When you ask people for feedback, everyone will be super positive and super nice to you, and that's because they're all nice people. But that doesn't mean that that counts as validation for your startup idea. I actually have quite a lot of personal experience with this, because I worked for a startup for 2 years. We were making apps for blind people to have better access to the internet. The stuff that blind people use nowadays to access the internet sounds like a robot reading source code. It really is awful. What we were making was much, much richer, much easier to use. It was like different voices, there were sound effects, music, all this kind of stuff made it much easier for a blind person to find their way around a web page. And we'd take what we'd made to blind people and test it with them. And they'd all say, yeah, this is amazing, this is brilliant, like add these features, it's as soon as you like get this launched on the market, we will be buying it like a shot. And it's, obviously they didn't, right? That's going to be the point of the story. We would take it back and they would say, oh, well, yeah, now it's costing £10. It's not really for me. I do think it's great. You should take it to these other people. And you take it to partially sighted people. And partially sighted people say, this is really an app for blind people. Do you see what I'm saying? Everyone thinks it's for someone else. And that is a problem that can happen to many startups. So my advice is, when you make MVPs, find the person who really is your customer and who's willing to pay from day one, because then you have found them already. And as soon as you build it, you know where you can go to sell, which is a brilliant place to be in. So the way to apply that to the no-queue coffee idea, what we're going to do is take those mock-ups to a cafe owner and say, in 2 weeks, you can have an exclusive world-first trial of this for a single day, and we're just going to charge you £30. Now, £30 is nothing to a cafe owner, right? I mean, the amount they're taking a day is way more than that. However, if they're not prepared to pay £30, that probably tells you something. Either there's a market you thought the market was there and it's not, or some of the features you think are really important actually aren't that important to the cafe owner. Or maybe it's worth less than that what it is now, but if you did some other stuff, it would be worth £50 for a day. By starting that conversation and immediately bringing the idea of cost and payment into it, you'll start to get really important feedback about your ideas, work out which ones work, which ones don't, and start heading in a different and more profitable direction. Don't assume you know what your customer is like, because your customer will be a totally different person to you, even if you think they're going to be like you. That kind of conversation lets you work out how you can build the smallest thing that people pay for. Once you've done that and you've got one customer, that's a brilliant position to be in, because your second customer is someone who is very similar to the first customer. Someone with similar concerns, running a similar business. Whatever it is that made the first customer want your product, the second customer will want it too. And that's a great place to be in to grow. And as you grow, you can build more MVPs. See, this is something I've heard people say. We've built the MVP, so now we're going to go out and build the real product, and it's going to cost 100K or so. To me, this is basically madness. Like, this totally misses the point of an MVP. This is like you've met someone at a party, you've got their number, and you go on a first date, and you think, oh, this is going amazingly. So before dessert even arrives, you're down on one knee proposing. Right? This is like you've skipped so many stages. You've got so much more to learn and understand and validate. Once you've done that one MVP, there are still things you need to understand about your customer. So you need to build another MVP on top of that first one. Go away and understand what it is that is making your customers buy it or not. Don't skip those steps, because if you go away and spend 100K on some amazing product that does everything under the sun, there's a good chance that no one will want it, because one of your assumptions was just slightly wrong. And if you'd found that out sooner, you might have gone in a slightly different direction that takes you to a more profitable business. So as you build up your product, you can also be building up revenue. There's nothing to say that an MVP can't earn you money. Ideally, it would very early on. But as you're building the product and you're building the revenue and building the customer base, it's a much more sane way to build your 100K product than just going and splashing out 100K in one go when you don't really understand what the customers are after. So this is really a summary slide. I mean, I'm a kind of consultant CTO to startups. I absolutely love this stuff. I do this all day, so I really would be interested in talking to anyone who thinks they need help deciding what their MVP is, or needs help building their MVP, or just wants to tell me about the talk or what you thought of it. All I would say is that do MVPs, build things that simply validate your assumptions about your business and progress slowly and build up slowly, and you've got a much better chance of success.
Just a couple of final announcements before we kick into the networking session. So let's see if I can get this to work again. Cool. All right, so we run these events monthly here at Google Campus, and it's the second Tuesday of every month. So our next event is on the 13th of May. We've got an awesome speaker for you that day. His name is Dr. Yves Bigner. He's the co-author of The Business Model Generation. And so a lot of you will have seen the Business Model Canvas. That came out of that. So he's going to come and talk to us in detail and tell us all the secrets and how to work that to your benefits. Also, we've partnered up with Internet World. So on the from the 17th to the 19th of June. We'll be running a much bigger version of this at Internet World. We'll also be running on one of their days there a pitching workshop. So you can come and get some hints and tips on how to practice your your pitches rather. So we'll teach you how to finalize those and get those really tweaked to go well. Are there any other announcements that you can think of? No? Okay, cool. One final one. I don't know if you guys have noticed yet, but we've launched a new group. Actually, I'm doing what you shouldn't do. We've got a new group called Hipsters, Hackers, and Hustlers. So we were originally going to change this group to be called that, but we've decided to keep this one as it is to focus solely on this sort of speed pitching to marry up entrepreneurs and developers and get these startups and co-founded and launched. And we have this overriding brand, which is Hipsters, Hackers, and Hustlers, where we'll be organizing all kinds of other events. We'll have a jobs board on the website. We'll have all kinds of things going on there. So please join this group if you want to be up to date with all the other things that we're going to be doing. So it's meetup.com, Hipsters, Hackers, and Hustlers. That's it. Thanks very much, and enjoy the networking.